Good morning. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. My name is Marilyn Orr, President of the club, and we are thrilled to have you join us today. This meeting broadcast is available on HCTV, as well as our Rotary of Hudson YouTube channel and Facebook. Our club meets weekly using this digital platform, Zoom. When we meet in person, it's at Laurel Lake Retirement Community for breakfast. We hope to get back to that soon. We meet most Wednesday mornings from 7:15 to 8:30 a.m. So come out to join us for a meeting. We would love to have you as a guest. To learn more about Rotary, our club, and the impact we are having on our local community and the world, please visit our website, rotaryhudson.org. So enjoy this meeting today and help us share the message that Rotary opens doors of opportunity.
And we're good to go.
Okay. Good morning, Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. Hopefully everybody figured it out. It only took me 15 minutes, but here we are. Our invocation this morning is by Jim Young.
And good morning, Rotarians and guests. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we ask that you guide us to use our freedom to help, to preserve, and strengthen the freedom of all by respecting and upholding our laws, by supporting our law enforcement agencies, by informing ourselves on current issues, by voting regularly and wisely, and by honoring the rights of other people. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. And to lead us in the pledge and the four-way test this morning, Ben Rexroad.
Good morning, everyone. Please join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, and liberty and justice for all. And now for the four-way test. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, Jim and Ben. And now our president, Marilyn Orr.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, despite the difficulties this morning, we are really excited to begin our month of political forums. Dave Basil has done a wonderful job of contacting the speakers that we have scheduled for this month, and we're going to jump off really quickly now and get started today. So I'm going to turn the podium over to David immediately. Okay, are you ready to go?
Yes,
Dave?
I am. Thank you, Marilyn.
Surely.
Good morning, fellow Rotarians and guests. Thank you for joining us this morning. As Marilyn indicated, October is typically the month in which we hear from government officials and elected officials and those seeking public office. So today we are going to kick things off with a presentation. We're going to hear from the two candidates for the Ohio House District 37 seat. We are going to have 5 minutes of prepared remarks from each of the candidates. That will be followed by a question and answer period. The candidates will have 1.5 minutes to answer each question. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, and I would ask that you submit the questions via the chat feature. There is a chat button at the bottom of the screen. If you find that, you can submit your question via chat, and then I will read the question to the candidates. We're going to proceed in alphabetical order this morning. So Mrs. Bigham will be the first speaker we have. Beth Bigham is the Republican candidate for the 37th District of the Ohio House of Representatives. She grew up in Northeast Ohio and is a resident of Hudson. Mrs. Bigham and her husband George are the parents of Phonce and Greta, who attend Hudson Public Schools. Beth is both a board-certified nurse practitioner with over 20 years of experience, as well as a small business owner. She holds an MBA, Master of Science, Bachelor of Science in Nursing, and Certificate in Construction from Kent State University, Turner Construction. She has taught health policy at Kent State University and has traveled to the OECD, IMF, and WHO for international healthcare studies. Beth has served as the Ward 4 member of Hudson City Council since 2017, when she was appointed to fill a vacancy. She was elected later that year to complete that unexpired term and was elected again in 2019. Please join me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to Beth Bigham. Mrs. Bigham.
David, I have the clock.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you. And thank you, Mayor Basil. Good morning, Rotarians and guests. It's a great pleasure to be with you this morning. As we survey the landscape in Ohio today, there are many areas that require the diligence and hard work that I have demonstrated during my time on City Council. COVID-19 has had a broad impact on the citizens of Ohio, whether it be the loss of educational and social opportunities for our children, job losses, increasing rates of suicide and drug use, missed evaluations for preventive care, delays in treatments, generalized fear, or COVID-related deaths. The consequences of this disease and the handling of it have been profound and devastating. With over 20 years experience as a nurse, including time spent in public health and policy, I understand the multidimensional burdens that this virus and the subsequent mandates have placed on Ohioans. As an experienced nurse practitioner, I am adept at triaging and managing risks, controlling infection risk, and compassionately caring for sick individuals. Having served as both a public health and policy educator and a frontline clinician, I also have the experience on the macro level to bridge the divide between theoretical modeling and the ambiguity and nuances that come with real-world implementation. Aside from my medical background, I have a healthcare MBA, and I am a small business owner. These experiences enhance my ability to treat both the health and the economic impacts. Recognizing that small business owners and employees have suffered unprecedented economic hardships resulting from COVID-19, economic recovery will be at the top of my agenda as your state representative. We must act now. With no end in sight to this pandemic, loans and subsidies may seem like the only solution, yet it is a short-term and costly temporary fix. We need a solution that is effective in the long term and less costly to the taxpayers. As a Hudson City Councilor, I have worked hard to reduce the regulatory burden on our small business community through legislation that has decreased regulation, lessening the economic burden on our restaurants and businesses, allowing them greater revenue opportunities and the prospect of survival. As your state legislator, I will seek to exempt small businesses from rules which better serve big businesses. Our citizens are suffering financially and need our economy to rebound. I understand the complex process of developing and funding health policy that will be relevant to the needs of the residents of Ohio's 37th district. I understand the funding and payment mechanisms associated with our healthcare system. My unique skill set, education, and passions have aligned at a pivotal moment in our history. We have a healthcare system in need of reform. Because important elements of our American healthcare system are determined at the state level, I am the only candidate able to bring these reforms, and I will support policies which increase access to quality care, expand the scope of practice for nurse practitioners to allow them to practice at the top of their license and education, expand common sense occupational licensing compacts, expand pricing transparency, expand access to telehealth beyond the currently declared COVID-19 emergency, eliminate imposing certificate of need laws. I intend to work hard to make our healthcare system more responsive. Through changes such as these, we can build healthier communities and lower the cost of healthcare. I support our hardworking men and women in uniform and do not in any way support the reckless defund the police movement. Our law enforcement officers, the vast majority of whom are hardworking, conscientious professionals, performing a difficult and often dangerous job, deserve our support. While I certainly condemn acts of racial violence and hatred, I also condemn the recent looting of businesses, violent rioting, and attacks and abuse against our law enforcement officers. This scourge has taken a toll on all of America, constituting an attack on our communities and destroying peace and economic prosperity. While serving on Hudson City Council, I have supported the full funding of our first responders, the funding of body cameras, and the implementation of best practices for recruiting, training, and supporting our law enforcement officers. Education and job training are important tools which propel Ohioans to economic prosperity and stability. I believe that each child is unique, and as such, each has distinct capabilities, learning styles, and goals. I support offering school choice to each child in the state of Ohio. I intend to work hard to promote educational reforms. A diverse body of learners is best served through a diversity of educational choices. Ohio spends nearly $2 billion a year to keep 50,000 people in prison. Many people in our system struggle with substance abuse disorder, and sometimes drug possession is their only crime. I support legislation that eliminates harsh sentencing laws that do not fit the crime. Each of us are created in the image of God, and He created us for a purpose. Our value as human beings originate from our Creator. He has fashioned us in our mother's womb, and He numbers our days. Family is the foundation of a strong society. I am pro-life, and I will support policies which align with the protection and support of Ohio's families. Ohio is currently 5th in the country for human trafficking cases. This is not acceptable. 20% of human trafficking cases involve children. And it disproportionately impacts females. Although no demographic is immune to this issue, we need to protect our women and children. State and local governments play a key role in preventing human trafficking, dismantling the infrastructure. Okay. I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Bigham.
Yes.
Next, we will hear from Casey Weinstein. Casey was elected as the state representative for Ohio's 37th House District in 2018. He is the ranking member on the Armed Services and Veterans Affairs Committee, serves on the Energy and Agriculture Committees, and was chosen to sit on the House Select Energy Committee, currently considering HB 6. Casey is a
Sorry, Dave, you were inadvertently muted. You'll have to unmute.
He probably doesn't know that.
No, Dave. Yeah, you.
Yeah, Dave probably doesn't know that.
Dave, you'll need to unmute.
Oh. Mayor, this is the best part where you say great things about me.
Okay, now
we need to hear your voice.
I unmuted and it kept remuting, so I apologize. Let me begin again. Casey was elected as the state representative for Ohio's 37th House District in 2018. He is the ranking member on the Armed Services and Veteran Affairs Committees and serves on the Energy and Agriculture Committees, and was also chosen to sit on the House Select Energy Committee, currently considering HB 6. Casey is a 2004 graduate of the Air Force Academy, served on active duty as Deputy Chief of Information Assurance at Space and Missile Systems in Los Angeles, and as officer in charge of maintenance and support at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He received an MBA from Ohio State University in 2007. He was a member of the 2014 Leadership Hudson class, which created the Solar Training and Education Center at Barlow Community Center. And he also served on Hudson City Council for Ward 2 from 2016 through 2018. Casey is married to his Air Force Academy classmate, Amanda, who is an economics professor at the University of Akron. They have 2 daughters, Nora and Amelia. Please join me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to Casey Weinstein. Casey?
Thank you, Mayor. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Always enjoy this event. So thank you for the opportunity to come address the club. I just want to talk about the theme of my first term, which has been bipartisanship and big ideas. On City Council, you know, I was the Democrat on Hudson City Council when I served there, but was able to work effectively across the aisle. Even in a nonpartisan environment, still there were some disagreements, but we were able to come together to do great things for Hudson, and that's the mentality that I took to the State House. Right when I started, I planned a series of bipartisan bus tours with my colleagues. We come from very different parts of the state, very different backgrounds, different constituencies, but we're all Ohioans. So 3 Republicans and 3 Democrat freshmen came together, and we toured each other's districts just to get a perspective from where we were each coming from early on. And that really set the tone for me for this first term. We were able to work together. I know there's a lot of partisanship out there today, but there's also good stories to share, and a lot of this General Assembly, I would say at least the first year of it, we're highly bipartisan, and we got some things done. We were able to make a big bipartisan down payment on infrastructure. People talk about infrastructure bills. We did an infrastructure bill in Ohio. We also altered the funding formula, which tilted the formula towards cities. Coming from City Council, I realized the benefit of spending at the local level, and I'm more of an advocate for putting the funds in those hands. So we were able to do that. That resulted in about $500,000 of extra funds for Hudson and cities across the district to put into road programs and other infrastructure. We made big investments in public education and pathways to higher education. It's a chronic issue, our public funding for education in Ohio, but we were able to make a historic increase in that funding, and also in college opportunity grants, which are the primary mechanism that Ohio uses to fund pathways to higher education for kids who need that financial assistance in Ohio. So we're going to keep more Ohioans in Ohio going to higher education here at Ohio schools. We raised teacher salaries. The minimum teacher salary at the beginning of the 133rd GA was $20,000 a year, if you can believe that. We made a much needed down payment on an increase for that to $30,000, still not enough, but it was the first increase in over a decade. I was part of a bipartisan bill to cover PTSD for first responders, which as a veteran, I recognize how critical that is, and work closely with our first responders throughout this GA to get that done. We had a bipartisan effort through the budget for a historic investment in clean water. We're in the Lake Erie watershed here. I ran on clean air and clean water. I put environmental issues out front, and we were able to get a massive investment in cleaning up Lake Erie done this General Assembly through the H2 Ohio program, and credit to Governor DeWine for his support of that initiative. I have a bipartisan bill to expand insurance coverage to kids with hearing aids. Believe it or not, hearing aids for kids are called cosmetic devices, and they're denied coverage. I started Madeline's Law, and through my, it was originally a Democratic-only bill, and then through a series of bipartisan bus tours, I wore down my Republican colleagues, and they agreed to co-sponsor my legislation. They've become my friends, and we're working now together to get this bill passed into law for Madeline's Law. We also got, to-go alcohol sales done. I know that's a little bit lighter, but that laid the groundwork for the DORA, which has been a really popular thing in Hudson. And one of my proudest moments has been the signing of my bill HB 133, SB 7 at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Museum. Spousal unemployment for military families is a chronic problem. Spousal unemployment is 25 to 30% for active duty families because of the frequent moves they have to make. My bill authorizes licensing reciprocity for those families. So when a family moves to Ohio, like mine did, and a lot of my classmates from the academy did, their spouse can work in this state. It's been a top 10 request from the DoD for a decade, and we got it done. And it was an honor to be at the signing ceremony with Governor DeWine at the museum earlier this year. Where I couldn't work across the aisle, I'm still proud of the work I've done on limits to high capacity magazines. I lived in Dayton for many years, part of my service to Wright-Pat. And the shooter in Dayton, which we unfortunately forget about these things, but was able to mass murder.
It's time.
Okay. Well, shoot, I ended on a sad note, but thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. Again, thank you to both candidates for your prepared remarks. We'll now enter into a period for questions, and we'll be looking forward to your answers. Again, I would remind everyone to please submit your questions via the chat feature. And if you could keep your questions short and to the point, that will assist in getting as many topics covered as possible. The first question, and I will ask Mr. Weinstein to respond to this first, and then Mrs. Bigham, you can respond. The first question, where does each candidate stand on the repeal of HB 6?
David, just to be clear, they have a minute and a half, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Was I going first?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mayor. So I've served on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. First of all, I think everybody knows where I stand when it comes to renewable energy and environmental issues. I haven't been shy about that since before I was on Hudson City Council. HB 6 was really bad policy. I spoke on the House floor a year ago in July against it, and I actually called it a dirty bill, both figuratively and literally. As I was on the Energy Committee trying to negotiate this thing and trying to make it better, it would go into a room and then it would come out worse. And I just did not understand what I was up against. I literally said it blew my mind. I could not comprehend why we were killing our renewable energy standards, our highly successful energy efficiency standards, adding bureaucracy and regulations to wind power, and effectively killing these growing industries while we were bailing out a failing corporation, a supposedly failing corporation, and also bailing out a non-competitive, dirty energy source in Indiana. I couldn't understand it. Well, now we know the massive corruption that was behind that bill. So not only was the policy really world-leadingly bad, but the corruption has been terrible. I've led the caucus and I've led efforts in the state to try to get this repealed. I was selected by both leaders of the committee, a Republican and a Democrat, appointed to this select committee, which is currently hearing repeal. Basically, everybody in the state wants this repealed except the House Republicans, Speaker Cupp and Chairman Hoops, who chairs the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. Mrs. Bigham. Mrs. Bigham, you are muted. Could you please unmute?
Thanks. I do this every week and I still sometimes forget to unmute myself. So yes, I am for repealing House Bill 6. I think many Republicans are, but I can only speak for myself. Reviewing the tainted process that this bill came together, how it came together. I've reviewed, the affidavits, and they're shocking to see just the hubris and the power that that one person and a group of people will seek to manipulate our citizens and the state of Ohio. So I am absolutely for repealing House Bill 6 and working to make it better.
Okay, thank you. The next question, and I will flip and ask you to respond to this first, Mrs. Bigham, and Mr. Weinstein, then you can respond. We have seen the influence of large corporate donations leading to wasted millions of taxpayer dollars on companies such as ECOT, which paid for students who never attended online classes, and First Energy, which got $2 billion of donations. What would each candidate do to ensure that the legislature puts the needs of citizens above corporate donors? Mrs. Bigham.
Okay, thank you. So I have always stood on government transparency and accountability. I ran on that with Hudson City Council, and I've supported those ideals. And I think it's important. I think that information should be shared with the public. And when you look at things like ECOT and charter, there were definitely issues. And I think there's legislation now that has resolved a lot of those things. Let me see what ensure the legislation's with the needs. Yeah. So I think, and it not accepting corporate donations. That's the other thing. So it's about accountability and transparency.
Thank you. Mr. Weinstein.
Well, I agree with Beth. I think corporate PAC money should not be in the political system. I think, funds in the flawed system that we have should be tied to humans, should be tied to people to the max extent possible. When it comes to the example we were just talking about, and where we see the eventualities of corporate PAC money and what that can lead to, bad policy for Ohioans. I'm one of a handful of legislators across the state who has never taken a corporate PAC check from First Energy. I don't accept corporate PAC checks at all. When I got elected, I got several sent to me from cable, broadband, oil and gas, and I kindly returned them. I declined to cash them. So I agree both as an individual legislator, I do not accept corporate PAC checks. I haven't accepted money from First Energy. And then from a policy perspective, we absolutely need more transparency and tighter campaign finance reform. I mean, we talk about this and it seems to be a hill we can't get up, but I'm committed to working on more disclosure and more limits on where funds can come from for candidates.
Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. The next question is directed to Mrs. Bigham. Mr. Weinstein, you can respond as well if you so choose. Mrs. Bigham, the question for you: why would you recommend limiting the requirements for healthcare workers for certificates of competence? And do you support the Ohio Constitution's requirement for public schools to serve Ohio children?
Well, the answer to the first question is I do not recommend limiting the requirements for healthcare workers for certificates of competence. I believe that nurse practitioners should be allowed to work to the top of their license and their ability. There's nothing that's to their full competence.
Okay.
So I'm not sure who wrote that question. James Field, no, maybe Becker.
No.
So I certainly believe that our first priority as healthcare providers are to protect and serve the public and to do it safely. So do no harm, is the first code. So the next question: do you support the requirement for public schools to serve Ohio children? Sure. Our Constitution, Ohio Constitution, states that the states, should educate the children, and we have taxes for that. Currently, the way Ohio funds that is unconstitutional, and nothing's been done about that. So yes, I also believe in choice, and the two are not mutually exclusive.
Okay. Mr. Weinstein, do you choose to make any comments on that question?
Yes, so specifically to schools, we in the House passed a voucher reform bill, this General Assembly. Public funds should go to public schools. That's what I've said. In as far as there is school choice, which is a great thing, I just don't think that that we should punish the public school district by taking funds away from it and redirecting it to a private school following that student. I think that the funds, that taxpayer funds, public funds, should go to those public schools. If a family chooses to take their child out of public schools and go to private schools, that's fantastic, that's their choice. But the way that it's done today, unfortunately, is that the funds, sometimes a greater share of funds than the school actually receives originally from the state, are taken and diverted to that school via a voucher. There was an attempt to greatly expand the number of school districts where that voucher program would become feasible. We fought that in the House in an overwhelmingly bipartisan fashion. We passed a good bill at 2 a.m. One morning this year, and unfortunately the Senate backed away from being able to get that done. But that's one note that I want to say that I want to continue working on, is protecting the public funds that go to the public schools.
Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. The next question, and we'll flip back around and we'll ask Mr. Weinstein to respond to this first. Mrs. Bigham, you can give the second response. Given nearly all gun crimes in the state are committed, this is in the comment from the questioner, given nearly all gun crimes in the state are committed by those in illegal possession, and more so only 0.2% of crimes are committed by concealed carry license holders, 80% of whom are suicides, do you believe we need to further restrict legal gun ownership and magazine capacity among citizens who have otherwise never been convicted of a crime, which many view as an assault on the Second Amendment?
Thank you, Mayor. I am for common sense gun reform. I think one death from a student in school, or a person in a temple, or somebody in a church, or somebody at a bar, including Ned Pepper's, which is a place I used to hang out in Dayton for many years. I think one unnecessary death is too many. I am absolutely for the Second Amendment, for concealed carry, for responsible gun ownership. At the same time, do I think you need a 100-round double barrel magazine? No, I don't, because in 32 seconds, that killer killed 9 Daytonians and injured 22 others because he had an effective 100-round magazine. I'm all for freedom, but I'm also for responsibility and reasonable limits that like your freedom ends at my freedom not to have a bullet enter my body. I think there are balances. I should have freedom to worship in my temple with my family without fear of being gunned down, right? That's my First Amendment right. So you have a Second Amendment right. I have a First Amendment right to worship without getting gunned down. So I think there are balances in these things. The bill that I led that I was going to talk about in my introduction was a reduction in the capacity magazine size. So that is the bill that I'm working on. I'm also co-sponsoring other gun reforms on enhancing background checks and other reasonable things that have been done in other states that have been shown to reduce the number of people who are dying from
That's
gun
time.
violence.
Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. Mrs. Bigham.
Unmute myself. Thanks. Great question. I would say no, I am not interested in restricting our Second Amendment right.
Okay. Thank you. The next question will go to you first, Mrs. Bigham, and then Mr. Weinstein. What role does science play in your approach to making healthcare and environmental and energy policies? Mrs. Bigham.
Sure, thanks. So I have 2 degrees in science, and so it's made a big impact in my life and the way I make decisions. Certainly we come to each problem that we encounter in life from a variety of different life experiences as well, and different knowledge, but I think data is important. And we're bombarded with data every day. Key thing about data is the interpretation of the data. So I think that's really an important factor to consider, and certainly as a nurse practitioner and a healthcare provider, whether it be just examining a patient, I'll give you that example. There are so many different pieces of data that I can get from a patient, but it's knowing which ones are important to make a good decision. And I think that that's the key. That's the key. But yes, I believe in science, and I've used it all my life, and during the past 20 years of taking care of people and making good decisions for their health and joining with them to guide them.
Okay, Mr. Weinstein.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, I am not a scientist or a health professional, but what I have done is listen to the public health officials and the experts, and I have abided by and supported them and abided by their guidance. As the governor, and he's in his COVID response. So that's what I'd say is where I don't have that expertise. I come from a business background. Then I listen and I heed what they're doing. One of the great unsung jobs of a representative is constituent services, and that job exploded for us in a big way in March when we had so many people seeking access to care, whether it be or benefits or help that they need. And so I've worked closely with the DeWine administration and 2 liaisons that he designated just for our staff, which he did for all reps. And so we work closely with them to get people access to the benefits and access to the care that they need. At the county level, we listened to the science and we made the right recommendations to help balance keeping people safe with keeping businesses open. And have many examples of where we've been able to keep people on the job safely by working with all these parties working together. I'm really proud to be endorsed by the Ohio State Medical Association, which is the premier medical association in Ohio, and not one that frequently endorses Democrats. I've worked closely with the Ohio Nurses Association, was on a Zoom call with them a couple days ago talking about response in the area. Thanks.
Thanks, Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. The next question, we will go to you first, Mr. Weinstein, and then Mrs. Bigham, if you would respond. This questioner is looking for comments on mail-in ballots. It seems to work in Colorado and Washington. Mr. Weinstein.
Mail-in ballots. Okay, so the sort of a question, sort of a comment. I am all for more people voting securely. I am more for access to voting. And so, I am going to mail in vote this year. My wife and I will. After the primary this year, which got very confusing with conflicting messages. As a legislator, I was confused. We had the Secretary of State putting out a June date. We had the legislator and the governor putting out an April date. I did not want a repeat of that. So I am all for good access and lots of different pathways for people to vote. I trust people. I don't believe voter fraud. There's no study that shows it is a systemic wide problem. It's done exclusively by mail in certain states. We've seen the overwhelming demand for mail-in voting. Frank LaRose I consider him a friend. I talked to Frank last week about this. What he talked about was transparency and communication. I completely agree. He's been transparent about this. We've sent out absentee ballot applications to everybody. That is the right path and the right way to go. Especially for folks who could be health compromised, immunocompromised. We don't know what the status is going to be on election day. If you feel comfortable to go vote in person that day, fantastic. If you would rather vote early, that's great. But mail-in voting, I absolutely agree, is something we rightfully put resources behind.
Mrs. Bigham.
Yes, so I would say there's a difference between mail-in voting and absentee voting. What we do in Ohio is absentee ballots, which I fully support. And I was with Frank last week, so I think that he's done an amazing job. There are a lot of defining sort of pathways for once, even if you mail out an application to every Ohioan, which they did. You have to fill that out, and there's a lot of different checkpoints, and then you can see your ballot come to you, know where it goes, know where it is in the process. So we have a lot of great pathways for accountability to make sure that you know where your ballot is going. So I completely support absentee ballot system. I actually used that last year during the election because I just wanted to be out there working at the polls and meeting with people. So I went ahead and did that, and this year I'll be doing early voting. So I think giving folks opportunities and to vote in a variety of different methods, whether that's absentee or taking the ballot, early voting, fantastic.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to you first for the next question, Mrs. Bigham, and then Mr. Weinstein can respond. In light of the president's proclamation that there will be no more COVID assistance until after the election, what should Ohio's path to protect our economy and citizens be?
Sure. And I'm not aware of this proclamation that the president made, but I would say that, what was the question? That what should our path to?
What should Ohio's path to protect our economy and citizens be?
Sure. Well, hindsight is 20/20, but looking at how our recovery has gone so far, I look at it from the public health perspective and as someone with an MBA as well. And you look at this and you say, what could we have done differently, and what do we need to do now? We need to protect the vulnerable. And I said that, probably within a month of all of this happening. And I just think it's so clear now. We need to make sure that we're doing that. But we also have to make sure that we're opening up the economy, allowing that to fully recover, and also to make sure that our kids are able to be educated in school and they have equal opportunities, that people who have drug addiction have access to care and access to their support groups. So I would say, the less government intervention in some ways, the better. Let's protect our vulnerable and focus on them.
Mr. Weinstein.
Thanks, Mary. And I think the question's referring to the president saying he was walking away from negotiations on a COVID relief bill. So from an economic perspective, I agree. We have to find a balance and to helping keep the economy open and helping to protect our small businesses while ensuring public health. And that's a challenge, but I think the state did a great job, especially early on, listening to Dr. Acton and public health experts in essentially flattening the curve initially. What we've done more recently is more localized support. I support that as well. We need to not treat this like a monolith. We can't make decisions for the entire state based on local conditions. And what you saw from Governor DeWine yesterday was data showing that this is moving to be more of the spikes are in Western Ohio, right? So different state resources need to be given to different parts of the state to help cope with this. I absolutely support the mask mandate. If we're going to get through this, and while we're waiting for a vaccine, which hopefully will come soon, wearing masks and maintaining social distance is the absolute best thing that we can do. I support the local decision-making that we've increasingly done so that we don't have rules for Cuyahoga County that are from Brown County, for example. So I support that, and I really support allocating as many state resources as we can to help these local communities.
Okay, wonderful. Next question, first for you, Mr. Weinstein, and then we'll look for a response from you, Mrs. Bigham. The question, how would you propose using the position of state representative to improve accountability in law enforcement and lessen the probability of racial/biased behavior by police?
Thank you. So I think when it comes to our police, we put them in very difficult situations, and we ask them to be a lot of things. We train them to enforce the law. We ask them to wear about 10 different hats. So that if we're going to do that, we need to give the police more resources. From a county perspective, we did a big investment in wraparound services this General Assembly. So things like mental health funding, additional resource officers at the county level, those are the types of things that can be allocated toward police departments to help with additional training and then actual additional resources when they're out on the ground. So I think that's important. I think racial bias training is important. I want to speak specifically to a bill that I've put out, though. It's a 1033 reform program. The 1033 program provides used or obsolete military grade equipment like an MRAP. Look up an MRAP if you've never seen one. It's essentially a tank, to local police departments. And that in itself, many studies have shown to be escalatory. When you have military grade equipment on the streets of Ohio, essentially serving the role that a National Guard would be if that ever needed to be brought in. So I authored a bill with my fellow rep, Erica Crawley, to do a 1033 reform program to limit. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. Mrs. Bigham.
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. I would say that police need to be provided the tools that they need. They are dealing with the crimes and the situations up front and center, and I think they know more about the tools that they need to combat those things than probably someone sitting in a seat in Columbus. So I definitely think that each city and municipality is very different across Ohio. We have dense cities, and we have rural areas, and certainly the way the crime that might be present in those areas vary. And so the way that you combat that would certainly be variable as well. I think, just someone who values accountability and transparency, there are certain things that we can do. And some of that is by providing, body cameras for our police. So not only are they protected, but the public is protected as well, because there's like an evidentiary chain where you can actually see what's happened. And I think that can be very helpful. And I do support making sure that our police are the best trained, in the world. And I definitely think that, that's something that I've supported on Hudson City Council. We have a great chief here, and he's been instrumental in bringing the best training to our force. I support that.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members or guests? I have no other questions coming in. One last question. This will be the last one for which we will have time. We will go to you first, Mrs. Bigham, and Mr. Weinstein, then we'll ask you to respond. Do either of you support the defund the police movement in the 37th House District?
Absolutely not. And I have never signed a pledge to defund the police.
Okay. Mr. Weinstein?
No, and neither have I. I've never signed a pledge or made any statement about defunding the police.
Okay. Thank you both. Again, Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. Thank you, Mrs. Bigham, for joining us this morning. We really appreciate the candor and the depth of your comments and your answers to the questions. President Marilyn, I will turn the podium back over to you to conclude the meeting.
Thank you very much, David. This is fantastic. It's always an exciting time in October. We look forward to it when it's an election year, and we're really grateful that so many members of the community have joined us this morning. Next week, on October 14th, we will host Representative Dave Joyce, who is standing for the Ohio Congressional District 14. So again, David, thank you for making the arrangements and hosting. So please invite your family and your friends and your neighbors next week. And remember, passcode, Rotary, all caps. We will reinforce that. That was a communication error on my part. As a reminder, the club board will be meeting next Wednesday. Immediately following our Zoom meeting, all members are encouraged to participate and join us. And we will close today, as I traditionally do, by looking at this day in history. In 1868, Cornell University was inaugurated in Ithaca, New York. In 1913, for the first time, Henry Ford's entire Highland Park automotive factory was run on a continuous moving assembly line when the chassis was added to the process. In 1963, U.S. President Kennedy signed a nuclear test ban treaty with Britain and the Soviet Union. 45 days later, he would be assassinated in Dallas. In 2003, in California, Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected governor in the recall election of Governor Gray Davis. So politics, it always is interesting. So again, thank you very much and have a wonderful day. To Representative Weinstein, thank you for coming. For Mrs. Bigham, we appreciate your attendance as well today.
Yes, thank you
It was great to see you both.
Thanks, everyone.
so much.